revisar si estamos en vivo. Solo voy a confiar. Es más, ni lo voy a salvar. Vamos directo en lectura. No me acuerdo dónde nos quedamos. Así que voy a regresar a una página. Fear gained more and more mastery over him, especially after this second, quite unexpected murder. He longed to run away. Sorry, it's fucking loud as that. He longed to run away from the place as fast as possible. And if at that moment he hadn't been capable of seeing and reasoning more correctly, if he had been able to realize all the difficulties of his position, the hopelessness, the hideousness, and the absurdity of it, if he could have understood how many obstacles and perhaps crimes he had still to overcome or to commit to get out of that place and to make his way home, it is very possible that he would have flung up everything and would have gone to give himself up, and not from fear, but from simple horror and loathing of what he had done. The feeling of loathing especially surged up when the feeling of loathing especially surged up within him and grew stronger every minute. He would not know. He would not now have gone to the box or even into the room for anything in the world. But a sort of blankness, even dreaminess, had begun by degrees to take possession of him. At moments, he forgot himself, or rather, he forgot what was the importance and caught at trifles. Glancing, however, into the kitchen and seeing a bucket half full of water on a bench, he bethought him of washing his hands and the axe. His hands were sticky with blood. He dropped the axe with the blade in the water, snatched a piece of soap that lay in a broken saucer on the window, and he began washing his hands in the bucket. When they were clean, he took out the axe, washed the blade, and spent a long time, about 3 minutes, washing the wood where there were spots of blood, rubbing them with soap. Then he wiped it all with some linen that was hanging to dry on a line in the kitchen. And then he was a long while attentively examining the axe at the window. There was no trace left on it. Only the wood was still damp. He carefully hung the axe in the noose under his coat. Then as far was possible, in the dim light in the kitchen, he looked over his coat, his trousers, and boots. At the first glance, there seemed to be nothing but stains on the boots. He wetted the rag and rubbed the boots. But he knew he was not looking thoroughly, that there might have... and rubbed the boots. He knew he was not looking thoroughly, and that there might be something quite noticeable that he was overlooking. He stood in the middle of the room, lost in thought. Dark, agonizing ideas rose in his mind. The idea that he was mad, and that at that moment he was incapable of reasoning, of protecting himself, that he ought perhaps to be doing something utterly different from what he was now doing. Good God, he muttered, I must fly. And he rushed into the entry, but here a shock of terror awaited him, such as he had never known before. He stood and gazed and could not believe his eyes. The door, the outer door from the stairs, at which he had not long before waited and rung, was standing unfastened and at least 6 inches open. No lock, no bolt. All the time, all the time. The old woman had not shut it after him, perhaps as precaution, but good God, why he had seen Lisabetta afterwards? And how could he? How could he have failed to reflect that she must have come in somehow? She could not have come through the wall. He dashed to the door and fastened the latch away. But no, the wrong thing again. I must get away. He unfastened the latch, opened the door, and began listening on the staircase. He listened a long time. Somewhere far away, it might be in the gateway, two voices were loudly and shrilly, shrilly, with high pitched and piercing voice or sound, shrilly shouting, quarreling and scolding. What are they about? He waited patiently. At last, all was still, as though suddenly cut off. They had separated. Sorry. There. He listened a long time. Somewhere far away, it might. Cool. He waited patiently. At last, all was still, as though suddenly cut off. They had separated. He was meaning to go out, but suddenly, on the floor below, the door was noisily open, and someone began going downstairs, humming a tune. How is it they all make such a noise? Flashed through his mind. Once more, he closed the door and waited. At last, all was still, not a soul stirring. Just want to make sure I've been pronouncing that right. It's come up a few times and I'm not sure.
Stirring.
Stirring, yep. Causing great excitement or strong emotion, rousing. He was just taking a step forward towards the stairs when he heard fresh footsteps. The steps sounded very far off, at the very bottom of the stairs, but he remembered quite clearly and distinctly that from the first sound he began for some reason to suspect that this was someone coming there, to the fourth floor, to the old woman. Why? Were the sounds somehow peculiar, significant? The steps were heavy, even and unhurried. Now he had passed the first floor. Now he was mounting higher. It was growing more and more distant. He could hear his heavy breathing. And now the third story had been reached. Come here. And and it seemed to him all at once that he was turned to stone, that it was like a dream in which one is being pursued, nearly caught, and will be killed, and is rooted to the spot, and cannot even move one's arms. At last, when the unknown was mounting to the fourth floor, he suddenly started and succeeded in slipping neatly and quietly back into the flat and closing the door behind him. Then he took the hook and softly, noiselessly fixed it in the catch. Fixed in the catch. Instinct helped him. When he was done, when he had done this, he crouched, holding his breath by the door. The unknown visitor was by now also at the door. They were now standing opposite one another, as he had just before been standing with the old woman. When the door divided them and he was listening, the visitor panted several times. He must be a big, fat man, thought Raskolnikov, squeezing the axe in his hand. It seemed like a dream indeed. The visitor took hold of the bell and rang loudly. As soon as the tin bell tinkled, Raskolnikov seemed to be aware of something moving in the room. For some seconds he listened quite seriously. The unknown rang again, waited, and suddenly tugged violently and impatiently at the handle of the door. Raskolnikov gazed in horror at the hook shanking in its fastening, and in blank terror expected every minute that the fastening would be pulled out. It certainly did seem possible, so violently was he shaking it. He was tempted to hold the fastening, but he might be aware of it. A giddiness came over him again. I shall fall down, flashed through his mind. But the unknown began to speak, and he recovered himself at once. What's up? Are they asleep or murdered? Damn them, he bawled in a thick voice. Hey, Alyona Ivanova, old witch. Lizaveta Ivanova, hey, my beauty, open the door. Oh, damn them. Are they asleep or what? And then, enraged, he tugged with all his might 12 times at the bell. He must certainly be a man of authority and an intimate acquaintance. At this moment, light, hurried steps were heard not far off from the stairs. Someone else was approaching. Raskolnikov had not heard them at first. You don't say there's no one at home, the newcomer cried in a cheerful, ringing voice, addressing the first visitor, who still went on pulling the bell. Good evening, Koch. From his voice, he must have been quite young, thought Raskolnikov. Who the devil can tell? I've almost broken the lock, answered Koch. But how do you come to know me? Why? The day before yesterday, I beat you 3 times running at billiards at Gambrinus. Oh, so they're not home? That's queer. It's awfully stupid, though. Where could the old woman have gone? I've come on business. Yes, and I have business with her, too. Well, what can we do? Go back, I suppose. Ay. And I was hoping to get some money, cried the young man. We must give it up, of course, but what did she fix this time for? The old witch fixed the time for me to come herself. It's out of my way, and where the devil she can have got to, I can't make out. She sits here from year's end to year's end, the old hag. Her legs are bad, and yet here all of a sudden she's out for a walk. Mm, hadn't we better ask the porter? What? Where she's gone, and when she'll be back? Damn it all. We might ask, but she never does go anywhere. And he once more tugged at the door handle. Damn it all. There's nothing to be done. We must go. Stay, cried the young man suddenly. Do you see how the door shakes if you pull it? Well, that shows it's not locked, but fastened with a hook. Do you hear how the hook clanks? Well, why don't you see? That proves that one of them is at home. If they were all out, they would have locked the door from outside with a key, and not with the hook from inside. There. Do you hear how the hook is clanking? To fasten the hook on the inside, they must be at home, don't you see? So they're so there they are, sitting inside, and don't open the door? Well, and so they must be, cried Koch, astonished. What are they about in there? What are they about in there? And he began furiously shaking the door. Stay, cried the young man again. Don't pull at it. There must be something wrong. Here, you've been ringing and pulling at the door, and still they don't open? So either they're both fainted, or what? I tell you what. Let's go and fetch the porter. Let him wake them up. All right. Both were going down. Stay. You stop here while I run down for the porter. What for? Well, you'd better. All right. I'm studying the law, you see. It's evident there's something wrong here. The young man cried hotly, and he ran downstairs. Koch remained. Once more, he softly touched the bell, which gave one tinkle. Then, gently, as though reflecting and looking about him, began touching the door handle, pulling it and letting it go, to make sure once more that it was only fastened by the hook. Then, puffing and panting, he went down and began looking at the keyhole. But the key was in the lock on the inside, and so nothing could be seen. Raskolnikov stood keeping tight hold of the axe. He was in a sort of delirium. He was even making ready to fight when they should come in. While they were knocking and talking together, the idea several times occurred to him to end it all at once and shout to them through the door. Now and then he was tempted to swear at them, to jeer at them, while they could not open the door. Only make haste, was the thought that flashed through his mind. But what the devil is he about? Time was passing, 1 minute and another. No one came. Koch began to be restless. What the devil? He cried suddenly, and impatience deserting his sentry duty. He too went down, hurrying and thumping with his heavy boots on the stairs. The steps died away. Good heavens, what am I to do? Raskolnikov unfastened the hook, opened the door. There was no sound. Abruptly, without any thought at all, he went out, closing the door as thoroughly as he could, and went downstairs. He had gone down 3 flights when suddenly he heard a loud noise below. Where could he go? Where could he go? There was nowhere to hide. He was just going back to the flat. Hey there, Catch the brute! Somebody dashed out of the flat below, shouting, and rather fell than ran downstairs, bawling at the top of his voice, Mitka, 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 Mitka! Blast him! The shout ended in a shriek. The last sounds came from the yard. All was still. But at the same instant, several men talking loud and fast began noisily mounting the stairs. There were 3 or 4 of them. He distinguished the ringing voice of the young man. They! Filled with despair, he went straight to meet them, feeling come what must. If they stopped him, all was lost. If they let him pass, all was lost too. They would remember him. They were approaching him. They were only a flight from him, and suddenly deliverance. A few steps from him, on the right, there was an empty flat with the door wide open. The flat on the second floor, where the painters on the second floor where the painters had been at work, and which, as though for his benefit, they had just left. It was they, no doubt, who had just run down, shouting. The second floor had only just been painted. In the middle of the room stood a pale and broken pot with paint and brushes. In one instant, he had whisked in at the open door, and hidden behind the wall. And only in the nick of the time, they had already reached the landing. Then they turned and went up to the 4th floor, talking loudly. He waited, went out on tiptoe, and ran down the stairs. I'm starting to trip, so I'm going to just leave it there.